Someone had to say it. Welcome back to Someone Had to Say It. On today's episode, we interviewed Lynne Golodner, the author of many books, including Cave of Secrets and I Love You, Charlie Brown, coming out in a couple weeks. We asked her about the history and background inspiration of all her books, including the research she does for each one, how she traveled to Scotland to live among the locals and to learn about Scottish rich history for her book Cave of Secrets. We talked about the characters, which include LGBTQ stories in her own experience in the Orthodox Jewish community. Of course, our conversation pivoted many times, so make sure to listen to the end. Please enjoy and don't forget to share, like, and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you for listening. Welcome back, everyone, to Someone Had to Say It. We are back for another episode, and we have another very interesting and exciting author. So please welcome and join and continue listening. We'll leave all the bloopers in. Lynne, is it Golodner or Golodner?
Golodner. Yeah.
Golodner. See, I'm saying it in a Russian way for some reason.
I think it might be a Russian name, but it's like a big open mouth Midwest. Golodner is like the kind of.
Oh yeah, you betcha.
Okay, got it. Now got it. Well, welcome.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, we're so happy that you're here. And right before we started recording, of course, we were talking about Ohio, Michigan, the whole rivalry, which I never understood because I didn't grow up, here in the United States, and most countries outside of the United States, they're not big in sports. They're not huge fanatics. Sure, football or soccer, but on my honeymoon, my husband and I, he's a huge sports fan, and we were on a cruise and we're walking through the boat, ship, whatever. And this guy goes up to us. My husband had I don't know if it was a Browns hat or a Buckeyes hat, Ohio State hat, something. And the guy goes, "Go blue." And I went, "Okay, go yellow." Like, I didn't know where the fuck what was about. My husband's like, shut up, don't think, just keep walking. What?
That's so funny.
Yeah,
It's such an American.
It's like so cheeky because, frankly, Michigan is better than Ohio State academically, usually in sports, I have to say. And that's like always, when I went to Michigan, it was always the last football game of the season was Michigan versus Ohio State. And it was like a huge build up to that game. That game and the Michigan State game were like the two when I was in college that were like fierce, and people had a side. And then in Michigan, Detroit sports are like phenomenal. The Red Wings and the Tigers and the Lions, like people are Detroit Lions fans when they lost for like decades, and they're like still these like diehard Lions fans. And I think it sort of emphasizes the whole Detroit persona of like we're very scrappy and we are going to come back and we're just going to fight, and like it's Detroit versus everybody. That's actually a brand. So like, there's a thing. But
that's so funny because my brother-in-law is the same way. He's such a Red Wings fan. And like when there's a game going on, he's just like, I'm sorry, I don't care if it's like, somebody close relative's funeral. I need to watch this game. Like they need me as a fan.
Yes, sure.
That is what I never understood. Every time my husband, his friends, my boys talk about games, any Ohio games, well, we went 20 and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, we? And I never understood what the hell they were talking about. I'm like, you're not part of the team. You're not like right there running with the football. Yeah. And they're like, just stop, just let you know.
This is so funny. I wanted to talk to Lynne about your amazing book, Cave of Secrets, which is so fascinating.
Thank you.
I'm only like 25% in, given Shavuos, and I'm Orthodox, so I should have emailed you sooner and like gotten whatever, but whatever. Yeah. But literally, I already have 2 pages of notes of questions on it. And I think my first one is, why the Scottish Highlanders? What
Yeah.
inspired you to, put this as a background for your book?
So it's my second novel, and by the way, it's won a ton of awards, which makes me so happy.
Yay!
Um,
I
Wow.
yes,
can
I
see
know.
why. It's beautiful. Such the writing itself is so beautiful. But
Oh,
yeah,
thank
keep
you.
going.
It's my second novel. My first one I think was closer to my life, and I think a lot of authors do that. And then I decided after I turned 50 that I wanted to take big trips each year for the rest of my life, if I can. And not just on vacation, but like be somewhere for some time, like go to the grocery, learn the roads, whatever. So the first time I did that was 2022, and it was in the Scottish Highlands. And I just wanted to be there. And I think like it's interesting. My first marriage, I was Orthodox then, and my first husband and I went to Scotland on our honeymoon, which was really hard to do kosher. It was really very interesting. It's like a whole other podcast, but
A
that
whole other podcast right there. I love
I
it.
know.
No, we'll talk about that because I have a lot of questions about that.
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny because I asked my ex-husband a few years ago, like, why did we do that? Why did we go there? He's like, I don't know. Like, but anyway, there's this thing about Scotland that just like calls me to it. And so I was there for that first honeymoon. And then I love anything to do with Scotland, whether it's storytelling or TV shows or movies or whatever. And so I decided my first sabbatical would be in Scotland. And I rented a house in the Highlands in this little town. And there wasn't even a grocery in the town or a gas station or anything. And
Wow.
rented a car and I went there, and my husband came for part of it, and then I was there alone for part of it, which I loved. And I went there to write, just to write. And I didn't have a project in mind. So I got there and I'm like, well, my author brand is has Jewish identity as a theme that runs through all of my books. And so I'm here in Scotland, Jews, what can I write about? I
Yeah.
know. And I started doing research, and I found these historical figures who were Jewish and Scottish in the
Oh,
19th century.
that
And
was my next question. Yeah. Were
so I
these based off real history? Yeah.
Yeah.
I found three people that were fascinating, and I actually, when I was in Scotland, started writing a historical fiction novel based on those real people. Two were a couple, and one was another guy, and like they never really crossed paths that I found in my research. But in my first version of this, they were going to,
Mm.
and I wrote about 20,000 words, and I'm like, I don't write historical fiction, and I don't know, like, and then I reached out to the descendants of the couple, and
No. Did
yeah,
you really?
I did, and they
Oh
have an
my
estate,
gosh.
and their estate you can only visit during certain times, and it wasn't when I was there, so I'm like, I'd love to come and visit you and talk with you about your ancestors. I'm writing this novel, and they're like, well, we don't really want our ancestors to be fictionalized, and
Ooh.
the thing is that like they're very well written about without me, bringing it up. But so of course, I got all grumbly and rebellious and asked my attorney, like, do I have to listen to this? Like, he's like, well, they can't really do anything. Like these people are historical figures, and you could write about them if you want to in fiction, but they could make life difficult for you. Like, why not just change the names? And
Right.
that's when I was like, I don't write historical fiction. I write contemporary fiction. And so I'm going to just change it all together. And I started over, and that's where Cave of Secrets was born. And the truth is that those three people inspired very ancillary characters in Cave of Secrets, which, if you're only a quarter of the way through, I don't think you've gotten to yet. Um, Shira, Benjamin, Hugh, have you
Yeah.
gotten to yet?
Well, yeah. She
With
ran
the
Benjamin.
letter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
Right.
In the beginning,
That's,
you're right.
that's where I am too. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that they were based on the historical real people, but you see that they're not the main characters.
And then what about Hugh? Because he was the Earl who married the Jewish woman who,
Yep.
because of anti-Semitism,
Wait,
they
don't tell
were.
me. Don't tell me. Don't tell me.
Oh, sorry. Okay, we won't get.
I really, I'm very into it. Like, I really want to know.
It's kind of so fast. It's almost like a soap opera. Like you can't help but like wanna like read
Yeah.
more and more. Like, oh my gosh, what happens next? And yeah.
Well, that's the thing. That's why I love stories like that. It's just they're so intertwined, and there's so many different things. And my question was similar along the lines about Scottish history and everything. Obviously, there's so much you have to research.
Yes.
But also, I believe in past lives, and I really, I've studied numerology with my husband for years now, which is one of the things. I don't know if I sent you your chart. Did I send you your chart?
Didn't, but I would love
Yeah.
it. my God.
We need to do that. I always send it to everyone we interview.
Okay.
But the reason you're thinking about Scotland so much is probably because in one of your past lives, which we can also find out, by
Yeah.
the way,
Yeah.
if this is, I mean, I'm sure this isn't your first life because you have so many interesting stories, and there's got to be something with Scotland in your past lives.
I think there must
Totally.
be. And what's so interesting is after I wrote this, I did ancestry DNA because I was like, there's got to be something in
Mm.
my lineage. And of course, it came back like 98% Eastern European Ashkenazi.
So
So I
disappointing.
know my kids were like, "What did you expect, mom?" But
Yeah.
like 1% was Denmark, and I'm like, "Okay, Vikings," and they
There
went
you go.
to Scotland, so I'm in. So it's gotta
Okay.
be something.
That's
See,
so funny that you bring up Denmark because I was just watching this film in Danish, which is about secrets we keep. Have you
Oh,
heard
I saw
about
it
that?
too. I saw it. Yeah.
What did you think of that? So, it kind of reminded me a little, not really exactly, but just the whole concept about these kind of dark, quote unquote, shameful, although in that, let's say in that series, it really was
Oh,
shameful.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
But whereas in your book, it wasn't, although, and it had me wondering, okay, I don't think this gives any spoilers away because you learn pretty early on, I think, that the Earl was gay,
Mhm.
which reminds me of another Netflix series called The Royals.
oh
Mm.
yeah,
Okay.
Did you
I'm
see
not
that? Where
no.
the
no, but
king, it was
it's
like a Eastern Indian king was gay, and it was a big secret because, it just wasn't done.
Right.
But my question is, I'm just like wondering while I was reading this, do you think nowadays, if you're an earl in the UK, is this still being gay? Is it still something you feel like you have to hide? Because I know within Orthodox Judaism, it's still something that you're not wanting to be openly,
Right.
gay with. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I'm definitely very far from the British aristocracy personally, but I don't know if it's accepted or not accepted. And the historical figures that I researched that inspired the characters, this was the rumor. It was obviously not confirmed because it was actually illegal for all of his
Wow.
life
Interesting.
for him to be gay. And this real life person that the Earl was based on, he was actually the prime minister for a short time in the UK. So
Holy
if he
moly.
was, it would have been a major scandal, you know?
yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, can we at least touch on the Orthodox community, your experience? And if you don't want to talk about it, that's fine, but I am fascinated by not only my own religion, because I didn't grow up religious and we couldn't be. So I'm always asking Heidi a lot of questions. And I'm sure at some point she's just gonna say, take a hike, enough with the question.
No,
But I'm
never.
kind of treating her like my own personal rabbi, or my historian. So I'm fascinated about your decision to write about those characters during the left the Orthodox community. Was that inspired by your own story? And if so, like, what was that like? That decision to leave the community?
Yeah, I mean, so I grew up Reform. I say I've been a smorgasbord of Jewish. And so, because I grew up Reform, I became Orthodox in my 20s, and I was until my late 30s. And then when I divorced my first husband, I also left the Orthodox community. So I belong to a conservative synagogue. I'm on the board. All that. Very Jewish, but sort of like I choose and I reject from all the denominations, is what I would say. So I'm sort of
Mhm.
like that rebellious Jew. Um, but there are things I loved about being Orthodox, and there are things obviously that didn't work for me, so I ultimately ended up leaving it. And my ex-husband, my kid's father, still is Orthodox. He always has been. So my first novel, Woman of Valor, has an Orthodox protagonist who chose to become religious but loves it and wants to figure out a way to stay even when she's challenged. And then in this book, in Cave of Secrets, it's clearly Sam, I mean, I don't think it's spoiling anything, but he's gay. He's
Right.
father, and so he leaves Orthodoxy in the 80s because he can't be out. He just can't. And
Right.
in his family in particular, they're very close-minded, and so there was a lot of research that went into that. I mean, it's based in the Detroit community of Oak Park, which is a suburb that is largely Orthodox. And I lived there for a long time. And I found lovely people there. So I'm not basing Sam on any one person or family in real world Detroit. But I do think that the way he was an outcast, the animosity he faced is very real and is something that, people would face. And I mean, I based some of the characters in his family on like an amalgamation of people I knew.
Mm.
So yeah, I think that I think it's hard to be gay in the Orthodox world. It's just not accepted, especially for men. I don't know if it's less so for women, but it's interesting. There's a family that I do know who has a child who's trans. And this child grew up from birth in the Orthodox world. The family's Orthodox and everything. And when this child came out as being trans, the parents, to give them so much credit, were very supportive. And so the child went from one section of the shul to the other. And the rabbi was like, "I'm sorry, you can't do this." And so the whole family left the shul. And so I give the family a lot of credit, but this was not like a Haredi shul. This was
Mm.
a fairly modern Orthodox synagogue. And
Wow, that is surprising to me.
yes, this was like maybe 10 years ago, 12 years
Mm.
ago.
Interesting.
So I think that in some parts of the Orthodox world today, there still could be those perspectives. I hope less so.
I mean, my husband says all the time the Torah has no problem, with women being lesbians. I do know, though, it's not done in the open. I've heard plenty of stories, especially in Borough Park for some reason, where it's, oh my gosh, I've heard so many crazy stories about what goes on behind the scenes in Borough Park. And I've never lived in Borough Park. I've walked down the side streets. But I mean, just down the sidewalks, whatever. And I've gotten many stares. It's like I don't know if they stare at each other or if it's just me. Like I walk into a store in Borough Park and right away they're like, "Where are you from?" I don't know if they just know everybody or if they can just recognize an outsider. But in any case, I know that I've heard that there's been a lot of stories where there's swinger parties or
Ooh.
there's just a lot of gay type of relationships behind the scenes. But again, it's all hearsay. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's that?
I was just gonna say that sounds very interesting.
I think
I
it's really interesting that people don't realize that all people, no matter your race, your religion, that there's always going to be people who look a certain way on the outside. I think, Lynn, that was a quote in your book that I really loved. In fact, I wrote it down and
Ooh. Quote me back
oh
to
no, I wrote down a few other quotes, but I remember reading that one about how your outside doesn't necessarily reflect your inside.
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
or
There were
match.
so many good quotes, and I'm only like 25% in. I'm
Oh,
like,
that's so
holy moly.
wow, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's obviously so much to that, and I think it's fascinating when people are so traditional and in such a long history of our religion, for them to finally be open to the idea that not everyone follows the same script,
Yeah.
right? So as hard as it is, right? I mean, but obviously when you look at the Torah and you read some of the passages, it's like, to today, does this make sense, in today's world, right? I mean, even simple things like washing hands, it wasn't for religion aspect, it was for health aspect, right? And washing hands before you eating and all that stuff. So I do hope that things are changing, but it's tough.
I mean, since COVID, I started washing my hands more.
I don't mean about, but yes, obviously, right?
Yeah, I just had to put that out there.
It's
I
so
know.
I went to New York for some book events in December, and I lived in New York when I was in my 20s and like took the subway, took the bus, like everything was just fine. And I got there and I'm like, I don't know if it's just that I'm old and in the Midwest where there's tons of space, but I was like, it's so crowded. There's so many people. And I took the subway and I'm like, how gross is it to hold on to these poles, which I never
Right.
would have thought before COVID. And now I'm like, the germs, like, oh my God, anyway.
I'm the same way. Like, I don't like opening public doors anymore with my fingers. I always go for the handicap buttons, and then even then, I don't want to use my hand, so I use my shoe. I like do like this karate sidekick, which is really embarrassing when people are watching. But
Especially wearing a skirt.
right,
Right, or dress.
exactly.
No, but I do know what you mean, and this is how we end up going off topics. Is that because things come up as we're talking to people?
For
But
sure.
yeah, no, I feel the same way. I don't think I was ever such a hypochondriac until COVID happened, and now that is constantly in my mind. It's constant my thoughts. Even, I mean, New York is one thing. Yes, I feel very claustrophobic there because everything is so compacted.
Yeah.
And my son went to school in New York, and we would come to visit him. I'd be like, "Oh, don't breathe on me." Literally, I would like hold my breath walking by people. And I know it's COVID because I've been to New York many times.
Yes.
And, we go to Europe, we're in cities, all metropolitan cities all the time. But yes, I find myself, I told my husband the other day, I'm like, okay, am I going crazy? Is there something wrong with me? When I walk by people, I tend to hold my breath
Oh,
because like I don't want to smell them and I don't want like their air getting on me, and I've become like psychotic. I really feel like I'm crazy, even though it's not a correct word to use anymore. But it's a thing. So you're not the only one. I open doors with like my sleeve, and my back, and yeah.
And it's totally COVID. Like, I wasn't
Mhm.
doing that before COVID.
You
But,
weren't. Yeah.
I wasn't. But something else I really loved, Lynn, about your book, I wrote this down, was a quote that it really resonated with me, which was, he was hungry for connection, free of judgment or scorn. And I know within Orthodox circles, which you probably know, it's called when you go off the derech or you leave the Orthodox lifestyle. It's also referred to as frying out, and frying in Yiddish, basically that translates to being free.
Mm.
Oh.
And so it really resonated with me, obviously, because I think, like Sam, there are certain aspects of Orthodox Judaism that I absolutely love, like, keeping Shabbos and Shavuos, that connection where you're off electronics and you connect with people. And even when there's like a rainstorm, like I was supposed to be at this party and there was a thunderstorm and like we couldn't text each other. And I don't know why I always think of Jane Austen times. Like but anyway, there is sort of like a romantic aspect, not in like the love romantic, but you probably
Yeah.
know what I mean,
Yeah.
romantic aspect.
Yeah.
But so yeah, it was just so interesting. So what inspired you to write, let's say, about the common theme of the secrets of being gay?
Right.
Not only in the Orthodox world, but as we see being in the upper class
Yeah.
of, the Earl and
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, and then and I don't know if you've gotten to this part, but uh, Mac has a sister who's a lesbian, and
Yeah, Emma.
yeah,
Right.
so and, and their parents don't necessarily know or whatever. So, I think that judgment is actually very common to humans. Like, people make judgments about others and situations really easily. I don't love it. I do it, and I sort of scold myself because I don't want to be that person. But I feel like what other people think of us matters a little more than it should. And I feel like a true relationship, a true friendship is free of judgment or scorn. And it's just sort of seeing the other person with curiosity. And so, when I wrote this book, since my first book was in first person, it was one perspective, it was one protagonist. And this book has four protagonists and it's third person. And I really did that to challenge myself, but also so that there could be so many different ways of seeing a situation, not just through one person's eyes. And I think that all of the characters are really trying to accept themselves and live according to their own best instincts and free from what anybody else thinks. I mean, even if you've read any of, the parts about Margaret, Mac's mother,
Yeah.
she's trying to play this role because she grew up poor and she married into the aristocracy, and she's so insecure about it that it almost ruins her life. And so,
Mm.
she has to get to a point where she can accept herself as she is and be real instead of putting on a front, which I think all of us have to do that at some point in life.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was so interesting
Sure.
seeing the insecurity from her eyes. Like she couldn't even fully accept the fact that her husband loved her
Yeah,
for who she was.
right.
So that,
Well,
yeah, I thought that was
compare
actually really
that.
fascinating and something very true about insecure people, where
Yeah.
they're sort of like, well, why me?
Right.
Yeah. And that the fact that he saw past not only the, her background and everything, but almost like, why does that matter?
Right.
You're you. So why does it matter if you were
Exactly.
poor or grew up, on the outskirts of the society or whatever? So, but it's interesting you say that, and I completely agree about the whole judgment thing. And whenever clients come to me, as a matchmaker, people always want to portray themselves in a certain way to me, right? Especially interviewing me with me for the first time, because I will be looking for their partner for them. And I love when people always say things to me and I'm sitting there going, that's the complete opposite. Do you want to try again? Do you want to start over? And one of the biggest things people say is, oh, I'm the least judgmental person you'll ever meet.
Do
I
they
just kind
say
of sit there. And I'm like, okay, that means you're the most judgmental person I'll
Yeah,
ever meet. Okay.
right.
First of all, we're all judgmental. We're judging everything and everyone because we're human beings. And
yeah,
if you say
Yes.
you're not, that's not normal. That's not how we're conditioned. That's not who we are. We always judge, even if we don't want to admit it, or if we don't say it, or if it's in our head. So I think it's very refreshing when people can come and say, you know what? Yeah, I judge.
yeah,
Yeah, I can be a bitch. I can be the. So, and I think going back to your book too, again, I think I'm on chapter 7 right now. So I love all the little intricacies, and I love learning the behind the scenes story of each character. Like, why was she like this? Talking about Margaret, why this insecurity? Well, now we understand why. I mean, can you imagine growing up like this, right? I've always had my own insecurities of being an immigrant, coming with, being here with no money and coming straight to Orange County, which is like one of the most wealthiest counties areas of California,
right.
and having to compete and seeing all these people with their BMWs at 16, daddy's money and everything. So I
How did you
completely
wind up there?
so my mom has her cousin is here, her first cousin, and he whatever it's called where they vouch for you, they
Sponsor.
sponsor you. Yeah, and he was the one that got us here. So we didn't have to go through Israel, we didn't have to go through Italy, we didn't have to go through any of those other routes that Soviet immigrants came. You usually go to Europe, you stay there like in a, I don't want to say refugee camp, but they kind of are. And they put you in a housing and it's a whole program. And you're there for like a year until you're able to come to the United States. We didn't have to do that because we had family here. But at the same time, we weren't given the refugee status. So we had no support from the government. We
Oh,
had
wow.
no help. We came with $350, I want to say.
Wow.
Wow.
And that was it. No car, no jobs, nothing.
Mm,
So in the back of my mind, when I read these stories, I'm understanding
yeah.
where that's coming from. So that was very interesting, and I can't wait to read more
Oh,
about
good.
it.
Okay.
So
Awesome.
yeah. And so, my questions are really a lot about just how you come up with these stories. I'm asking every author, what is the process like? So one day you wake up and you're like, ooh, I got a great story.
So I love that question. The first book I wrote, Woman of Valor, I was a pantser. I think I'm a pantser by nature, which for people who don't know is you write by the seat of your pants, or if you're a plotter,
Yes,
you plot it out. So
yes.
pantsers or plotters. So I'm a born pantser who converted to plotting. So with Cave of Secrets, I plotted because with Woman of Valor, I went through like 3 different endings to the book before I found one that worked, because I didn't plan it out. It was much harder to do. There were more holes in the plot, and I just had sort of an idea, but I hadn't really thought it through. For Cave of Secrets, I had an extensive plan, like point by point throughout the book, as well as character sketches. And I did a ton of research, as I mentioned. And then after I had written the first draft, I went back to Scotland and I spent time in Loch Lomond, where it takes place, because I wasn't there the first time, and in Edinburgh, which I had visited Edinburgh in 2000 with my first husband, but this is like 23 years later. So I went back so that I could spend time like really on the ground and doing, like the in-person research and getting those details. And I think that the kernel of the idea is there, and then I sort of flesh it out. Like I spent a month writing every day, figuring out the plan for this book before I ever started writing. And so that's my process now. So like I have a book coming out next week, my third novel, which is called I Love You, Charlie Tanner. And I had the idea for the premise of the book in my head for like 18 months.
Wow.
Yeah, I just was like, I knew that I wanted a more middle-aged protagonist, because my first two books, they're younger women. And I wanted her to have lost a life partner, and she processes her grief in the garden. And that was like all I knew. And it developed as I planned it out. And it was really quick to write because it was in my head for so long. But again, I had to sort of plan it out. And it takes a lot of turns. And this is one of the things I think is so cool about writing novels, is that even because I was really worried when I decided to plot instead of pants, I didn't want to lose that spontaneity of like, ooh, look at the twist that the story just took or whatever. When I have pantsed, I find that the characters like channel through me, and
Yeah.
I may be writing, but I'm like, where did that come from? Oh, they said that? Like, how cool is that?
Right.
Um,
It's
still
kind of like our podcast that take a different turn.
Yes.
exactly.
Can we just pause for a second?
Yeah.
So let's tell people what that is, because I just learned about this.
Yeah.
It's from a book, Save the Cat Writes a Novel, which Annie Catherine actually just told me, get that book if you're considering writing a novel. I did.
Yep.
And that's where I learned those two different words. So maybe we can kind of explain a little bit to our listeners the different writing styles. And
so pantsing is where you make it up as you go along. You have sort of an idea, but you don't know where it's going to go. And as you're writing, it develops. And plotting is where you map it out ahead of time. So maybe it's an outline, or maybe it's like a beat sheet, which Save the Cat author Blake, he actually created. And I take his beat sheet and I've modified it a little bit for myself, but I do use that as a guide when I'm planning out a novel. So I have like a stack. I'll show you actually, because my next novel is all plotted. I haven't even started yet, but it's like it's like multiple pages here, like tons,
Wow.
And I sit there, and I also have character sketches, and I do both, so that I know, like, what color eyes do they have, so that I don't make a mistake and screw it up throughout the book. And so I keep these on the desk in front of me when I'm writing. And what happens is, so I thought, oh my gosh, am I sacrificing spontaneity, or the story writing itself, or flowing where it needs to go? But it still happens. And so I just make notes on the printed beat sheet, like, oh no, it went in this direction, or no, it went in that direction. And so I think that's the most fun part of writing, is like, I think I know where I'm taking it, but I really don't. And it surprises me too.
Yeah, I love that. I like that you're a very visual writer, obviously. I'm the same way. I have to print things and I have to have them in my hand. And a lot of times I just have things sitting around my desk that I can look at. And, my husband always laughs at me because he's got like 4 monitors that he just goes between the monitors and he's looking at things on the screen. I can't do that. I need it in front of me.
Yeah.
And I just, I like the different process, and I like to learn how each author writes, because I feel like I'm so neurotic about the way I do things, but we all have the way we do things, right? And
We all
but
do.
I guess my follow-up question to that is, and might sound really shallow, but how do you financially afford to literally just go to Scotland for a month? And I don't know how expensive it is because I haven't been there, but I'm assuming that you need some sort of, seed money.
Sugar daddy?
Sugar
Is that
daddy.
what you were going to say?
I mean, that's what I want to know, because I've been talking about sugar daddies for sugar mama, sugar daddy, whatever.
Sugar mama.
either
That
way.
works too. Yeah.
Well, my husband is a very hardworking archivist. He doesn't make a ton of money, and so it's definitely not a sugar daddy. But
Oh, an archivist. That's where Eve comes from.
yes,
Oh,
I love
very
that.
cool.
yeah,
Oh.
he definitely went, with a fine tooth comb through the book and was like, they don't use white gloves, they do this or whatever. But
So cool.
yeah, but so when I made this decision to pivot, so I should back up. I was a journalist for 15 years, and then I created a marketing company in 2007. And I was writing books all along, poetry, nonfiction that were published traditionally, but it was always on the side. It was like, I want to write books, but how could I possibly earn a living from it, et cetera. So the marketing company is something I've done now for, 18 years. And it's been really successful. And it was really big for a while as well. And when I sort of hit, I guess we'll call it a midlife crisis, where I said, it was like before COVID, and I said, if I say I'm a writer, but it's not what I do most of the time, am I really a writer? And like, when in my life am I going to take it seriously and make it my priority? And so I had this like aha moment. I'm like, I need to do this, because if I just keep waiting, it's never going to happen. And I've always wanted to write fiction, and I've written other novels that never got published, but sort of wanted to really focus on it. And I knew I needed to be writing regularly if that was my goal. So I had to plan to shrink my business and keep only a couple of like essential bread and butter clients so that I had the income and I wouldn't have to like pay staff and whatever. So I really shrank it. And then I had this process of pivoting my day so that I started with writing, which is my most creative time. And I used to like get up at 5 a.m. and write for an hour and then do my work day. And then I was writing for 2 hours. And then I eventually got to a point where I could start writing at 8 and write all morning and then do my like marketing work in the afternoon. And I also, I've always taught writing classes because I have an MFA in creative writing. And so I've taught at universities and online and everything. And so I started teaching more and doing less marketing. So I still had the income stream, but I was surrounded by all things writing. And so when I said I was going to make that change and I want to take these big month-long trips, it's basically like funding my life. So like I have enough marketing clients, both for the income we need for our family, but also so that I can put a lot in savings so that I can do these trips. And then I plan them really carefully so that I can afford to do it. So,
Got it. Yeah. And what was, sorry to interrupt, what was your marketing business in marketing?
So it's what I call storytelling marketing. It really takes a storytelling approach, like a journalism approach, and everything is about what is the narrative and who needs to hear it in order to grow your business's exposure. And so like I've worked with a lot of schools and universities. I've worked with nonprofits. I have helped authors with their marketing plans. Now I mostly work with either entrepreneurs or nonprofits. And so I have 3 or 4 clients, and that's actually more than I did for the past 5 years. I had 2 that were like big enough. And so that sort of funds everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, when people, and this is the first time I've actually asked someone because I've been kind of afraid to ask that question. But, you think about especially people that listen to us that are aspiring authors, and they listen, these authors go on these months-long adventures to random places and research or just sit there and write in peace without any distractions. And in my head, I'm always like, who is funding this? Like, can someone tell me where to get, is there money somewhere stashed aside for aspiring authors, because you need that, right? And I think a lot of times for us, and that brings me to my next question, so to speak, I guess, is as moms, mothers and women in general, we're always putting that on the back burner, right? Every author we've interviewed, Heidi, and you've asked them, how do you balance being a mother and a wife and this and that? And it's always like, well, my kids come first, my husband, this and that, and then I write when I have the time or when I can.
Right.
We're never putting, at least when the children are younger, it's never like, well, my writing comes first and then my kids, right? I've yet to hear that, which would be kind of refreshing. Like, fuck the kids,
Exactly, right? Fuck the family. Yeah, exactly.
Because, when you interview men, which I have before, and it's like, well, that was my main goal. So
It's a given.
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's a given. My work, my writing, my book, my this. And I was like, oh, that's
But
how it works.
speaking of judgment, if you're a woman and you try to put your career first, I guess, I
Yeah.
don't know. Yeah, you
Yeah,
get judged
exactly.
automatically.
For sure. Well, it's interesting. I have 4 kids, and the youngest is 19 now. So I do feel a certain freedom, but they still come first. So like I haven't really written regularly since the beginning of March. And it's because I went on a trip with my husband, and then I was really into working on the book launch that's for next week, which is a lot of energy. And then my youngest came home from this 3-month trip out west, and this month, for example, is like a ton of family things. So the next 2 weeks, there's like no time even for work. It's just family stuff. So so I knew end of June is really when I start diving into the next novel, and I feel it because I'm happiest when I'm writing, and
Mm.
I know that. I mean, as a marketer, as somebody who is a marketing entrepreneur, I mean, I think also in regard to what you said, Julia, like I have an entrepreneurial mindset where you have to spend money to make money. And so if I want a book to be authentic, I need to invest in it in order to have that like realistic tone and have the reader really relate to it. Now, to be fair, you can do a lot of this from home. You can do a lot of research where you don't need to necessarily go to Scotland for a month. I mean, if you can't, you could be looking at pictures and videos, and you can interview people on Zoom, and you can read
Yeah.
things, and there's so much you can do. But I do think that investing in yourself and your creativity pays off in the long run. And so I'm willing to do it. But I didn't do this when my kids were little. Like I started the marketing company in 2007. My youngest was born in 2006. And so
Mm.
I was a newly single mother of 3 very little kids. And I started a business, and the economy was spiraling downward, and it was like a really scary time. And it just happened to do well. But like I wasn't taking trips then, and I wasn't even writing books then. I was like, people pay me so I can pay my bills, please. Like that was all I was
Well,
doing.
see, that's kind of disappointing. I was kind of hoping you were like, oh, yeah, I just left my kids with a nanny and I just took off and forget them. I got to do this. And I'm waiting for that woman, that mother to come on and just say, I put my book first and everything
Well,
else.
I do now. I do now. The past 5 years I have actually, to be
Right,
fair.
right.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I joke, obviously, but there's some truth to that, right? We always put our children first in our families, and that's just how it is as a mother. And I think it's interesting to hear the different ways people come about writing, right? And the whole process and everything. So I think it's very fascinating, and I appreciate you sharing that. One of the things you just said was that as a business person, entrepreneur, you always believe that you got to spend money to make money.
Yeah.
And do you? Because I never believed that. And I always thought that was such an American thing. And I'm not saying you wrong or, and I'm right, because I built a business from nothing. And people kept telling me, I was one of the first matchmakers to start. The way I was matching people was very traditional, like every Jewish woman ever meddles in people's love life, right? And I would walk around with like a brochure, not brochure, a pamphlet, a folder full of people's one sheet, their couple pictures, bio, and I walked around with that wherever I went because I never knew who I would meet. And then slowly and slowly, people kept telling me, you need a website, you need a website. So I invested like $500 into the business, and then it just grew from there. And I always tell new and upcoming matchmakers, you do not need to spend money to make money. You need to start with as many free things as you can. And at least that's just been my mentality in life. But I want to hear and this is obviously a different topic, as
Yeah.
always happens.
So it's interesting because I have also taken an entrepreneurial approach to how I'm publishing now, versus how I published before, which I can get into. But I do think there is, especially in creative arts, there is a scarcity mentality. There's like this idea of like, I have no money and it's not going to make me any money, so I need to do whatever I can without spending a lot. Which truthfully, I don't spend a ton. Like I don't take out loans, I don't do debt, I don't do any of that. But and I work from home, and I have for most of my career where I had people on contract working from their homes. But I do think that at the right moments and the right ways, you have to invest in yourself if you want to see the dividends paid. And so
Right.
I have no hesitation to go buy a new computer. Like if it's old or it's slow, like I'll do it, or if I think travel is going to help me not only for research, but just to get away and take a break and be creative, I'll jump on it because
Mm,
what could be better, And so I feel like in the end, it ends up building me in ways I could never have imagined. And
right.
so I think a lot of artists and writers definitely have a scarcity mentality where they feel like they can't spend anything until they hit the big contract from, Simon and Schuster for six figures, which is may never come. It may come, like who knows? And so what are you doing in the meantime? Whereas like I invest in my writing career all the time by not the tools I buy, but also the places I go. Like everywhere I go, some writing comes out of it. And I end up either writing essays or a new book or whatever, and it pays off and I'm better for it too. So I think investing in yourself and your career is hugely important.
And
Mhm.
how long does it take you to write a book on average?
So it took me about 3 months to write the first draft of Cave of Secrets, and
Wow.
then yeah, and then I spent several months revising and then working with my editor and that kind of thing. My book that's coming out next week, I Love You, Charlie Tanner, I wrote in 6 weeks, but it was
What?
in my head for 18 months. It was like I was sitting there with
That
it.
that's amazing. And I know
Yeah.
Jean Meltzer absolutely loves it, and
Yes,
so I can't wait to read it.
I know. I'm so excited. So
Yeah, that's
Right.
amazing.
thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
I think there's obviously a difference in investing in yourself versus just spending money because, I need this and I need this. So I totally understand what you're saying. And I think it's also my immigrant mentality. We don't spend money for anything at all,
Right.
So, but I like to hear, I need to hear that because that's what my non-immigrant husband says to me all the time.
Yeah.
It's okay for you to do this. If you tell him you need to go somewhere for research or just so you can start writing again, then do it. If you need to lock yourself in an Airbnb by the beach somewhere, just do it. Tell
Right.
me, like we'll make it work. But
Wow.
I guess I
That's a
know,
good
which is
man.
great. I don't want to say cheap. I hate using that word. I'm very frugal. And
Yeah.
I'm the one that's like, what did you spend $10 on? You went to get coffee again? What the
But
fuck do
there's
you
nothing
know?
wrong with that. The wealthiest people are the most frugal. I think it's so smart?
But
Yeah,
there's got to
doesn't
be
Bill
a
Gates
balance.
drive like a Ford
Right.
or something like that? I have to ask you a question, Lynn, because I this kind of just struck me. So one of the things you wrote, which I loved, is that history should be handled by impartial people who don't have a stake in it.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And I was just wondering, do you think it's possible for any historian to be completely impartial?
because they're human, right? They're coming from
Right.
their
That's a great
background.
question. I mean, I think that when you specialize in an area of history, you become very passionate about it, and so you can't help but have a stake in it. My husband is an archivist about teacher unions, and so he's like so passionate about education and labor and the history of the American education system, and he cares very deeply about it, which is why he's collecting and preserving all of the details of that history.
Mhm.
Um, so I think there's a bias. I think all humans have bias, but I think that you have to like at the same time he's really good at standing back and saying this is worth keeping and this is not. And
Ah,
Mm,
so like you have to be able to have that distance enough to say um, to see what matters and to let go of what doesn't.
and
mhm.
so for somebody like Mac and his family, it's kind of hard to be that impartial voice when lived in the land. This is your family, I suppose. And
Yeah.
but I think a lot about Israel, for example, and since October 7th, and there's people who have just such polar opposites opinions and who are also both historians. And I'm like, well, there can only be one true, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Reality, the
and then
facts,
it's
and yeah.
yeah, so it's like I don't understand, and then my husband's like, well, all historians are gonna find their own twist
Mhm.
of So it's hard to know,
Well,
right?
history is only like the only history we know is the ones that people told. So there are histories we don't know. There are alternate stories to history that were lost. And so it's the ones who are telling the narratives that are claiming history, that are inventing history in a way. So I think there's a lot of ways to look at it. I mean, with regard to Israel, it's very scary to me because I've always been very proudly Jewish, very proudly Zionist, but since October 7th, and I was just listening to a podcast today, Call Me Back with Dan Senor, about, and he was interviewing a journalist in Israel whose name I'm forgetting, but they were talking about this philosophy of, which is like basically like all that rising anti-Semitism is not necessarily about the current war. It's about the existence of a Jewish state. It's just age old anti Semitism. And
Right.
it's just chilling. Like I was listening to it and I was like almost hyperventilating. Like, what do we do? I mean, and
Mhm.
this is a history that people are really like glomming onto, that is not true. And
Right.
know, I have a girlfriend who engaged with someone in conversation for the purpose of trying to build understanding, who
Yeah.
the other person is not Jewish or Palestinian, but anyway, has very, let's say, misguided perspectives, to be kind.
Right.
And and my friend kept forwarding me the email chain, and like my head was spinning reading it. And I was like, you need to walk away. You need to not have this conversation because the things
Wow.
the other person was saying were like just age old anti-Semitic tropes. And I'm just like,
Right.
Mhm.
not all Jews have money. Nope, not all Jews are
Yeah.
successful. Just
It's
I,
Muslims.
just
you know,
disgusting.
it's
Yeah.
so interesting you bring that up. Well, both of you really. It's because I've been listening to, you know who Mel Robbins is, right? And I've had my issues with her, being the know it all for everything. It seemed like, I do enjoy the guests she has on who are actual experts in whatever topic. So, the whole book that she wrote called The Let Them Theory. I don't know if you heard about that. Um, it's actually very interesting, and I haven't read it, but I was just telling Heidi earlier about it. I think it's very fascinating. There's an audiobook as well if you enjoy that better. So I started listening to it. It's called, she came up with this theory of let them, meaning whatever's going on with other people, let them. Whatever they're saying, let them. Basically, just walking away, not. N- but there's also another part to it. Let them, but also let me
Mhm.
react in a certain way. It's very interesting. And
Yeah,
as I'm listening to it as a Jewish woman, everything you just said comes to mind.
yeah,
Okay, let them be anti-Semites, let them say all these old, tropes and
yeah.
all the things that are false and stereotypes. But do we let them? She's not
We end
obviously
up at the
writing
gas chambers.
God
Yeah.
forbid. God forbid. Like, I'll say this. One of my best friends and I were talking about this recently, and she was like, how do we educate people to not be anti-Semitic? And I said, you
Mhm.
can't. I said, you
Yeah,
cannot teach people to not hate. What you can do is you can lean in to be proudly, joyfully Jewish and publicly. And that's all we can do. And frankly, it's going to shift my energy and it's going to send a different message out to the world. So
yeah.
like I always wear my Jewish star. I talk about
Me too.
like always.
Yay.
Me too, but not today. I've gone my nose. I always do. I don't leave the house without it.
Right, and like I write books that always have Jewish identity weaving through them, whether it's overtly an Orthodox character or it's subtle. There's Jewish identity and proud Jewish identity is in every one of my books, and it's like I'm not afraid to put those in the world because I think we need more positive, joyful Jewish representation, and I hope that that contributes to the narrative and changes the sentiment. So I think that's all we can do. We can let them be idiots, and then we can put positive things out there that are going to counter that narrative. So,
Exactly.
Yeah. My husband always says he is envious of the way Muslims are so proud and so
Yeah.
strong, whereas Jewish people tend to be apologists.
oh yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah, and we kind of downplay everything. I,
right.
I think there's a lot of that inner voice, at least for me, that goes in my head that's like, don't be too loud, don't be too proud, don't
Right.
be too
Same.
Jewish, because, I mean, that's just the way I grew up with it. Obviously, in a former USSR, you couldn't be Jewish. It was, obviously dangerous to. And so from the time I was a child, a very young child, I mean, we're talking 3, 4, 5 years old, all we heard was, don't tell people you're Jewish. Be quiet. We're not going to talk. You don't need to tell anyone. People knew, especially, I don't know how, but people in Soviet Union always knew, even now, who is Jewish and who is not. And I remember when I received for my, 12th birthday, we couldn't have a bat mitzvah. We didn't do any of that. But a relative brought me a Jewish star, my very first Jewish star, Star of David, in a chain from Germany. Gave it to me. And
ironic.
yeah, well, they happened to move there from Russia, but I wore it to school under my uniform, and it came out when we were running, doing something, a kid, and someone saw it. And instead of just tucking it back in, I just wore it the rest of the day like that, and people would stare, people said things, even though they knew I was, but here I am showing it. And the same day, the principal of the school, or the head, whoever it is, called my mom into the office. And the conversation was, I think I talked about it in my book. I can't remember if that was one of the stories. The conversation was not that we're not allowed to wear jewelry. It was that kind of jewelry. She should not be wearing. Why is she coming to school with that? It wasn't that jewelry in general, And my mom sat there going, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. It's never going to happen again. And I was like, what the fuck? Even at 13 or 12, I was like, this is not okay. But she was like, shut up, just stop, let's go home. Took it, put it in her jewelry box, and I didn't see it until we moved to this country. And that is always in the back of my mind. Am I being too loud about it? Am I being too loud?
Even as I grew up in Orthodox schools, I was, from biblical times to present day, all you hear as a little kid is all these stories about the Goyim, the non-Jews, hating you. So before we ever took a field trip, there was always the same speech, which is, don't make a Chillul Hashem, which is like disgracing God's name. And so anytime like a kid misbehaved, I'm like, here we go, the next Holocaust. Thanks a lot, buddy. And it's a lot of pressure for children.
Yeah, but was it about don't disgrace Hashem, or was it don't be Jewish? Just don't say you're Jew, don't act Jewish, don't behave Jewish.
Well, we would be still wearing the yarmulkes and the tzitzis, and the girls would be wearing. So we were outwardly very Jewish and proud, but there was this responsibility of you have to be perfect, because the world is already looking for an excuse to hate you.
Yeah,
okay. I gotcha. Yeah, I get it. It's
a lot of pressure.
Unfair. Yeah, it's unfair. It's a lot of pressure. Yeah, for sure.
I've always had a really strong personality and been told, I'm too much and all of that. And I feel like in my 50s, I'm owning it. And I feel like it's coming out in Judaism. And so like right after October 7th, this woman I had called a friend who is in Canada, and she sent out an email that basically, it was like 3 weeks after, she was talking about like how people are feeling all the pain, and here are some sources to help you. And there was like a Holocaust denier in this email. And I'm not kidding. It was like, anyway, so yeah. And she, this was from her business email, and she's a, spiritual counselor, ironically, like will help you with like, energy healing. And I was like, wait, did I just see that? And so I emailed her. I said, I don't know if I'm seeing this correctly, and I'm surprised to hear this from you. And also you've never used your business to speak out about political matters. So why now? This feels anti-Semitic to me. And she took like a week to respond, and she basically gaslit me and was like, I'm offended that you would accuse me of this. And I'm like, you're offended. Like, come on. And so I said, I think I cannot be friends with you. Have a great life, and it felt
good
like
for you.
I was just so horrified, and I was like, I can't do it. I just can't. And so now I am like loud and proud and owning it and just saying, that, you know, I'm not going to be told to sit and be quiet and play nice when nobody like if she's in everybody's corner but mine, forget it.
Yeah.
She's done.
Right. That's what I said to like this best-selling author who I had been friends with. She
Mhm.
had never said anything political. And then all of a sudden, after October 7th, like a few weeks into it, she starts doing this fundraiser for Palestinian children, which sounds really nice. But I think we all know that Hamas wants the children to suffer. And
Yeah.
anyway, so I just said, you know, this is not a problem for me, the fact that you're fundraising, but what is a problem is that you completely ignored the atrocities, you know, that happened on October 7th. You were completely silent. What about all the Jewish children that were murdered and raped and the ones that are left orphans?
Yes. Yeah.
And that to me, and guess what her response is? She blocked me. She couldn't even, she didn't even have the
That's-
guts to
yeah.
respond.
Very common. Yeah. And it's unfortunate because that's what there's no more conversation about it. I really wish there were more people that you can have a conversation with.
Yeah.
I'm assuming this woman is not Jewish, right?
No.
Right.
And I
Okay.
had been
Yeah.
so respectful. I didn't come off as angry. I just said, look, I'm just confused. I'm hurt, but I really love
Yeah.
you. I respect you. I
Yeah.
did it in a very like, hey, let's talk type of way. Not I'm
Right.
trying to make a point. I'm just like, I don't understand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I think too, what people don't realize is none of us Jewish people, nobody in the Jewish community is saying that the suffering that the Gazans are going through, the Palestinians are going through right now is good, right? We
No.
don't want anybody to suffer. And raising funds for food, for aid is a noble thing to do. But do you understand what you're raising money for? None of this is going to get to their hands, you know, unless you physically go and bring them this basket of whatever, you know, food or whatever
Right.
it is. It's
Right.
not getting to them. It's being confiscated. And
Not
I
only
think,
that, but they resell it.
yeah, and to avoid the massacre that
Yeah.
happened and to jump into let's help the Palestinian children, it's
Yeah.
like, okay, can you just acknowledge what happened first? I think
Yeah.
that is the biggest thing, right? So,
Yeah.
and again, we could talk about this for
We've gotten a little
hours.
off it.
We always do because there's so much to talk about. And each time we have someone on, obviously, you know, different personalities and different people, and we love to go off topic.
I just want to mention one thing because you're interested in past lives, Julia. And
Yeah.
so the next novel that I want to write that the plan I just showed you is inspired by my friendship with my best friend, Katie, who was raised Catholic. And I've always called her Rabbi Katie because I feel like she knows more about Judaism than so many Jews.
Wow.
And I feel like when we met in our 20s that in a former life, I might have been Catholic, she might have been Jewish, and we were connected. We're like soul sisters at some level. So this next book is based on our friendship, and it's about like two women who are friends today, but their souls were connected in a former life.
Ooh,
So,
I love that.
yeah. So
I absolutely love stories like that. You know, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, I'm obsessed with it. Obviously, since, you know, my dad's passing and because it was so young and it was so sudden, I've become completely obsessed with anything that has to do with past lives and people that have passed on. And it's incredible. In fact, someone just got, oh, actually, it was Annie Catherine who just got me a free session with a medium. So
So cool.
there's a website. Apparently, if you're interested, I'll forward you. There's a website where
Yeah.
you can gift a session, a 30-minute session, or you
Wow.
can get a free one yourself. It's like a community, you know,
love
where people that are interested. And obviously, if you like it, you can schedule another one. So I am excited to do that. This will probably be my fifth session with the medium. So in fact, I have a lot of dreams. That's a whole other topic.
Me too.
Every
I've had a past life in a dream.
See, this, I think you and I have talked about that. I have dreams every night. And last night I had a dream about my dad, which I've been asking for him to come in my dreams. He hasn't in a while.
Wow.
And in my dream, I was telling him not to have the surgery.
Oh,
I woke up and I was
man.
falling, and I just went to find my husband, and he knows when I come in to find him in the morning because we don't sleep in the same rooms. We've talked about that, and I
Yep,
think
same. My husband and
for the
I.
best.
Yep.
For the best. But he knows when I come looking for him, because I usually don't just go about my day. He's the one that comes to find me in the morning.
Oh,
Then he knows that I had a dream about my dad, and
wow.
it's just so yeah, on that note, there's so much to it. And I really, I can't wait to read that story
Well,
because
I can't
that's,
wait to write it.
Me
So
too.
I'll keep you posted when I do write it.
please do, please do. And if you want, I actually have an interview with someone who is very intuitive.
Okay.
She doesn't do past lives. She doesn't do mediumship typically, unless it's for friends and family, because it's not, she's a healer.
Yeah.
And she's Jewish. She's from the former Soviet, she's from Azerbaijan.
Mm-hmm.
But it was like a gift that just came to her
Oh,
after a death in the family. And
Wow.
the way I found her, I'll send you the episode. I want to say it was episode 45. I found her by sheer, I don't want to say coincidence because nothing is a coincidence in life, but she came to me and you'll have goosebumps when you listen to it. But we literally, the way we connected, she messaged me and said, were you looking for a medium? And I was like, yeah. She said, well, I don't really do this, but she said, can I ask you something? Did you have someone that just recently passed, like 2 months ago? I said, yes. She's
Wow.
like, was his name Vladimir?
Oh my
And I
God.
just went, I started bawling. I had goosebumps, like I have goosebumps
oh,
right now. And I'm like, yes, that was my dad. She's like, I know. I was, some people don't want to hear it, but he's here with me and he hasn't left me alone in 24 hours. Can we talk?
Wow.
Didn't charge me, didn't want to charge me, didn't know what to charge me because she's like, I don't do this, but this guy is in the shower with me. He is waking me up. He is moving my stuff. And that's when they say, because they always say that people that pass on, they will find the person to connect, like the
wow.
intermediate medium, to talk to you. So anyway, but that's a whole other topic.
Yeah.
An hour.
Yes.
So thank you so much. I mean, I love talking to you. Can't speak for Heidi, but I think she did.
I love talking to Lynne. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. It's been so much fun. I feel like we could talk for hours or days. So
We could
thank you.
totally, yeah, we could
We
totally do that.
can, but then people are like, okay, bitches, I gotta go.
I'm shooting out. Done.
Yeah.
Enough. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but come back, talk to us, please. Let us know how the book is going. Can't wait to read the one that's coming out. Good. Let's tell
I
people.
love Charlie Tanner. Is that it?
I love you, Charlie Tanner.
I love you, Charlie.
Charlie
Tanner.
Tanner.
Yes.
Yep.
Can't wait.
Yeah.
And come back again and talk to us. And thank you for, all your advice. If you have any last parting bits of wisdom for our listeners.
Oh,
authors.
well, I don't know. I think the one thing I would say is if you want to write a book, write a book. That's just, I mean, honestly, so many
Do
people
it.
are like, I'm not a writer. Well, I don't have any training. And I'm like, just write the book. You can learn what you need to learn, but if you have a story in you, absolutely put it down.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. That's the only way to do it. Just do it, right? And then get an editor to help you edit things out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So thank you so much for being here. We look forward to talking to you again.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share. And even if you didn't enjoy it, share anyway. Thank you for listening and come back to Someone Had to Say It.